Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're trying to cut through some of the complexities surrounding Iran and Gaza, a region that, well, it's constantly in the headlines. Okay, let's dive straight in then. Iran's strategic moves. Our source mentions these reported overtures Iran's making to China, seeking help specifically to rebuild its military strength. That feels like a really big geopolitical chess move. But how feasible is that, really? Such a
Yeah.
deep military partnership.
Well, a key insight here, I think, is understanding China's strategic thinking. Direct military intervention or, massive arms supplies like some might imagine. That's highly improbable.
Oh, really? Why is that?
It boils down to their economy. China's stability is paramount for them. They depend so heavily on exports, and the source really emphasizes this point. They have a profound fear of severe international sanctions.
Right, like the Trump tariffs.
Exactly. Remember the impact those had. They're extremely wary of anything that could trigger that kind of blow again. Self-preservation is key.
Okay, so it's less about this grand military alliance and more about China looking out for itself. How does that translate into the kind of support they might actually offer Iran then?
Precisely. So instead of direct involvement, you see China typically offering indirect support. We've seen parallels, haven't we, with their aid to Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah, like the motorcycles and cars.
Right? Things like cheap motorcycles, cars, stuff like that, rather than, say, advanced weaponry. Directly supplying sophisticated arms to Iran is, well, it's difficult logistically. And frankly, it's unlikely to give Iran the power to decisively win any major conflict, not without a proper air defense system anyway.
And providing those systems would expose China to sanctions.
Bingo. Again, it comes back to the sanctions they're so desperate to avoid. It's also worth noting, regarding Russia, the source suggests China's interest isn't just about support, it's about timing. They don't want Russia to fall too fast, perhaps because they need time to, let's say, absorb the situation effectively.
That makes a lot of sense. China playing a longer game, maybe. Okay, let's shift gears a little. The source also talks about Iran's nuclear program. What's the current thinking on its capabilities, especially after that recent 12-day conflict? And what consequences does the source lay out if they keep pursuing it?
This is a really critical point from the transcript. The assessment is that Iran's nuclear development capability has likely been, and the source uses the phrase, reduced significantly.
Mm.
A lot of their equipment might have been damaged in that conflict. And the message is stark. Continuing down the nuclear path would make Iran, quote, a luring target. It would invite severe consequences.
Mm-hmm.
The source even posits that it might be better for Iran to, well, give up this pursuit entirely
Give it up. And do what instead?
and return to a role of spiritual leadership. I mean, millions look to them for that guidance. It's presented as a potential alternative path.
Spiritual leadership versus nuclear ambition, that's quite a contrast. But, given how deeply religious ideology seems to drive decisions there, like the source points out, does it offer any insight into what might actually make them shift away from nuclear development? It seems, well, incredibly difficult to imagine.
It is a genuine challenge, no doubt.
Mm.
The implication in the source is that when religious ideology dictates policy to this degree, genuine dialogue becomes almost impossible. It makes further confrontation much more likely.
Right.
So for Iran to take a different path, it would probably require a significant internal shift in priorities, moving away from confrontation, jumping towards focusing on the well-being of its own people or its broader spiritual influence.
That paints a really complex picture. Iran's external strategy, its leadership, but what about inside Iran, the people themselves? Beyond the geopolitics and the nuclear headlines, what did the source reveal about how ordinary Iranians are feeling amidst all this pressure?
Yeah, here's where the insights from the source get really compelling, I think. It paints a picture of the majority of Iranians being Western-oriented and progressive, often highly educated.
Really? That's interesting.
Yes, and they express feeling, suffocated by the current restrictions. Plus, they face huge difficulties if they even try to leave the country.
So there's this widespread desire for something different then.
Absolutely. The source points to widespread protests against mandatory religious practices like the hijab. It suggests the leadership might eventually be forced to yield to public pressure for more freedom. Many Iranians, it seems, just want to be seen as, quote, normal humans by the rest of the world, not as strange humans, even if their leaders view their current devoutness as, the correct way.
Normal humans.
Yeah. And the source gives that tragic example, the female doctor who was killed because her scientific mindset clashed with traditional views. It really underscores this deep internal struggle.
Wow, that example.
Yeah.
It really does highlight the human cost, doesn't it? And it reminds me of that surprising anecdote from the source, the one about the football stadium, where fans actually booed when a Palestinian flag was waved after a mosque was attacked. That seems to indicate a pretty strong public preference for, well, normalcy over political or religious displays.
It's a powerful moment, the source flags,
Hmm.
absolutely. And it reinforces a really crucial distinction that often gets blurred,
Hmm.
the difference between Palestine and Hamas.
Right, that's important.
The source clarifies that Palestine is often used as a sort of shield by Hamas, and on the other side, it's used as a term to condemn terrorists.
Hmm.
But the Palestinian people themselves, they're not terrorists. Hamas is, however, a part of that landscape.
Okay.
And the challenge, as the source points out, is how aid intended for ordinary Palestinians can unfortunately end up flowing to Hamas. It complicates genuine assistance efforts. Ultimately, the source kind of concludes that leaders on both sides have, at times, used their own people as tools, which just causes widespread suffering.
A vital clarification. Okay, let's pivot now to the Gaza conflict itself. Our source mentions that recent meeting, July 7th, between Netanyahu and former President Trump in D.C. Gaza was apparently a key topic. What insights does our source offer about the situation for the people there, especially regarding Trump's controversial suggestion?
Yeah, the source details Trump's suggestion to, quote, move all people out of Gaza.
Hmm.
And it highlights just how problematic that is, primarily because it completely disregards the Palestinians' right to their homeland.
Of course, and the obvious question.
Exactly. Where would they go? That's the crucial question it raises. Now, Netanyahu's stated position, according to the source, is more like whoever wants to stay can stay, whoever wants to leave can leave.
Oh.
But the fundamental problem isn't just the freedom to leave, it's the lack of any viable place to go.
And does the source shed light on that? The feasibility of a mass exodus? Are neighboring countries willing to take people in?
The source is pretty clear on this.
Yeah.
No, neighboring countries are largely unwilling. Egypt has firmly refused. They cite past experiences where Hamas-affiliated groups apparently cooperated in efforts to overthrow their government.
Okay, so Egypt's a definite no.
And Jordan has refused as well. Other countries in the Arab League, like, say, Saudi Arabia, unlikely to accept significant numbers, if any at all. So the strategy, as maybe hinted at by the source, could involve trying to fragment the Palestinian population,
Dispersing them.
fragmenting them to prevent them forming a unified force.
That seems to be the implication, which suggests a very long, drawn-out, difficult situation for the people of Gaza. So even potential short-term fixes get incredibly complicated because of this issue of where people would go. What about things like a short-term ceasefire, maybe 60 days? And prisoner or hostage exchanges, those are often talked about.
Well, the hostage exchange part is definitely presented as a positive potential development. That's clear. However, this overarching issue of population movement and the lack of a real long-term solution, it makes any kind of lasting resolution seem like, quote, a long and drawn-out matter.
Right. Still seems far off.
The source does suggest, though, that if Hamas's ties to, say, Iran and Hezbollah were cut, its combat capabilities would significantly decrease, which could potentially limit its future actions more to, hiding weapons and planning terrorism rather than large-scale conflict.
That would be a major shift in their operational capacity. But what about the people inside Gaza? Does the source offer any surprising insights into their feelings about Hamas?
It does, actually, and it's quite revealing. The source indicates there have been protests by Palestinians against Hamas.
Against Hamas, from within Gaza.
Yes. It suggests that at least some residents see Hamas itself as a significant part of the problem. They believe Hamas's presence hinders their own happiness, their own well-being. So even though Hamas controls the area, there's a segment of the population that recognizes Hamas's actions directly contribute to their suffering.
That's significant internal dissent.
It is. But this lack of real bargaining power unfortunately leaves them vulnerable. It puts them at risk of being, as the source suggests, dispersed across the region.
That internal dynamic is powerful. But how does the source balance this with Israel's actions? What does it say about Israel's response?
Indeed. The source does acknowledge Israel's intense focus on its own security. Often it says at the expense of human rights. It describes Netanyahu's actions as disproportionate and even uses the term genocidal.
Strong terms.
Very strong. But it balances this by also acknowledging that Hamas initiated the attacks on Israel. So while Israel's response is portrayed as disproportionate, the stated aim is apparently to prevent future problems by, quote, destroying everything.
A brutal calculus.
Extremely. And the tragic reality, as the source concludes, is just massive Palestinian casualties. It calls it, plain and simple, a tragedy of humanity.
So what does this all mean? We've really gone deep today into this complex interplay, international geopolitics, those powerful internal pressures within Iran, and the just profound human cost that's so evident in both Iran and Gaza. We started off asking if there's any clear path to normalcy, to peace for the people caught in the middle.
And the source, I think, reveals this powerful paradox, doesn't it? On one hand, you have this widespread desire, seemingly, for just normalcy and peace among ordinary people, both in Iran and Gaza. But on the other hand, you have leaders whose actions, whether they're driven by power or ideology or both, they just seem to perpetually prolong the conflict and the suffering.
A real disconnect.
A huge disconnect. So given that, what truly motivates these leaders? Why prioritize these dynamics over the actual well-being of their populations? And maybe the tough question is a true, lasting resolution always just out of reach because of these complex, deeply entrenched priorities? That's definitely something for all of us to consider as these events continue to unfold.